Welcome everyone. My apologies for starting 1 minute behind. We were just getting the presentation sorted out, but thank you everybody for being here. This is going to be a a I hesitate to use the word complex because they're all complex in their own way, and my job is to make them less complex. But I think this is a topic that can end up being somewhat complex, I guess, if that makes sense. There's a lot of different moving pieces to caregiving, and this is not a tutorial on how to caregive per se. I mean, a lot of you could tell me that better than I could tell you. But what the key that I want to key in on today, and I'm vamping a little bit so everybody can trickle in who's waiting in the waiting room, is these are the things we need to start thinking about. There's obviously going to be a lot of financial tie-ins, but just decision making. What do we need to think about as we ourselves get older? Maybe what do we need to think about as our parents get older or people that we are going to be caring for ourselves? And how do we make that easier on ourselves to care for people? And then by the same token, how do you make that easier on your kids or whoever's going to take care of you? To start off with, just a brief story, and I may reference this. We were fortunate to work with lots of different people, of course, as you might imagine. And one of the people that we work with, one of the families that we work with, were have been caregiving for a number of years for a family friend. And this family friend is had been getting up there in age and had been having memory issues, and husband had passed away, and both husband and wife from this couple had no kids, and they were both only children themselves. So they had nobody as far as family goes to watch out for them. And thank goodness for these friends that could step in and sort of become their power of attorney. And I'll go through what that entails and kind of navigate her life for her, the surviving wife in this case, both financially, but also just personally. And helping them through that process was an all-encompassing task. I mean, I really saw all angles of the caregiving. Obviously, I wasn't the one doing it, but the financial side, the legal side, the logistical, the housing, all of that stuff merges into this one picture of how do we just make this person's life work for them as their capacity diminishes and they can't take care of themselves. And that's a lot of what we're going to get at, the things that you should be thinking about there. So the goal is that this is not a depressing conversation. I mean, in some ways it is, but in a lot of ways it will be a topic that it's just really good to be prepared about because that makes it go so much smoother. So there's my preamble. I've got a lot of stuff to get through, and I will try my best not to just talk super fast at you as I get through all of the info. Again, most of you are going to know me. My name is Anthony Gerbi, a financial advisor with Stein Financial Group. I'll give a second for the disclosures. I'm not a medical person. I'm not obviously not going to pretend to be one at all, but we are going to talk about health to an extent here. You'll see as we go through. So, keep that in mind. I'm also not an attorney, but we are going to talk about some, I guess, legal things like power of attorney, for example. And I can certainly tell you all about power of attorney, despite the fact that, yes, I am not an attorney or an accountant myself. I'm a financial advisor. So the problem is obvious, but it's nice to kind of ground ourselves with the statement here. Elder caregiving is challenging. That might be the understatement of the year. It's also, as many of you know, challenging in completely unique ways. So that example I just gave you of that family, they had their own unique set of circumstances there. That yours are going to be very different, just by definition that we all lead different lives. I guess that's the complex part. And the key is try to reduce that complexity through planning, I guess would be the core message of today. So, a caregiving plan, I don't need to just read every slide, but if we make a plan or try to think about these moving targets or variables ahead of time, it can really make life easier on the caregiver and make life better for the care receiver. That's the whole point of why we do this. Um, so, what are the most important things when we start thinking about this? Ensure that the care for the person being cared for is good. I think we can all agree. Like, if we had to zero out one thing that was zero in on one thing that was most important, okay, the point of caregiving is to improve their life, right? So, what do we need to think about there? Let's get into some of the details here. Medical needs are first and foremost, right? And again, I'm no doctor, but we need to make sure they're being cared for medically, especially if there's an issue going on. I do encourage people to go through and write stuff down, use a questionnaire if you like, put it on a computer. Don't just try to keep it all up here. Okay. And it's tempting to do that because especially if you're the caregiver, it's like, well, okay, I'm the one who knows all this. But what if you want to go on vacation someday? What if you're not there when something happens and it's all in your head, right? So I know that's an extreme example. I'm sure none of us have everything just all in our heads and nothing written down. But try to make a habit of doing that. It's not, okay, this is not just a list of their medication or things like that, but just what needs to happen for this person to be in the best medical care, period. Try to externalize that in one way or another. That makes a big difference both for you and for them. All right. So the thing about this sort of stuff, and I know we all probably have life experiences that somewhat track this. You never know when something's going to happen. Medically, whatever, right? When your planning is going to be needed to put into implementation. You just never know. Life is unpredictable that way. That's why when you sit down with me and we talk, I'm sitting there saying, have you done a will recently? Do you have a healthcare directive? What about power of attorney? That sort of stuff. I just said it this morning in a meeting I had and just reminded, yeah, I think those are things that we should get done now because that's going to make life easier just in case something were to pop up. And look, there's these what if questions at the bottom. We don't need to spend our lives thinking about, well, what if this happens? What if that happens, right? The point is plan for it and then you don't have to think about the what if. But what if somebody becomes incapacitated? Who's going to make the medical decisions? If it's multiple people, for example, I'm going to use a lot of for examples here. And again, some of you, it will apply to you, some of it won't. I'll do my best to make it as broad as possible. But for example, if there's multiple people making medical decisions, do they tend to agree? Do we think it's likely that they'll agree? Right? Same thing with financial, especially if it's multiple people. And for people who have multiple kids, and your number one goal is maybe to try to treat them fairly, right? That's maybe not a good idea. Maybe there should be one decision maker because then a decision just gets made, right? And there's all sorts of trip mines and little potholes to avoid when setting this up. And we can help you kind of navigate that. That's the key is navigating all those little potholes along the way. So I don't think I've said anything so far that is groundbreaking, right? We need to make a plan. Sooner rather than later is better. Not necessarily that it's going to make a difference. A lot of people can do it later and be just fine because nothing's happened sooner, but you just never know. So start planning with the caregiving discussion, quote unquote, the caregiving discussion. What do they want? If you're the caregiver, what do they want? If you're doing this for yourself, what do you want? Right? What do you want to happen to money? Who's the leader? Who's the person who's going to make these decisions? If it's you're dealing with your parents, for example, and you have siblings, who's the one who's going to take charge there and be the leader? Even if it is a group decision, it's still worth it to have a leader. I'll give you an example, and this is sort of a best case scenario, but on my dad's side, my dad is one of five. He's got four sisters. They're all around, and my grandmother passed away a handful of years ago now. But two, my dad and one of my aunts were the power of attorney, were the healthcare, the medical decision makers, all that stuff. They were empowered to do that. Now, it was two, right? Not one. So there was a risk there that if they disagreed with each other, well, we could have a real problem on our hands because they were both empowered to make those decisions. Now, fortunately, as my grandmother had her kind of end of life care and all that stuff, both financially and medically, they really did agree pretty much on everything. So that's best case scenario. I don't think we should count on that always. But the point is, it was not a five-way committee, right? It was not something where we needed to call a meeting and everybody had to say their piece. In this case, it was just two. So I do encourage you to think about who are the people, not just that you trust. I say this with a lot of different conversations when we're picking beneficiaries or somebody who's acting on your behalf. Pick somebody who's going to do what you want. Okay? Not just what they think is best, but what they think you would have wanted. That is so key because the whole point of this is you've set it up the way you want it and you've got opinions about this in theory. And I know I'm talking kind of back and forth. I'm saying you watching this potentially caring for a parent or a friend and you thinking about yourself and maybe your kids or whoever caring for you. I'm going to try to talk about both those scenarios because they are the same. It's just what stage of life you're at. But forgive me if I bounce back and forth between those two. So, what are the main issues? We have to think about medical, legal, financial, and personal issues is just kind of the catch-all for the anything other than medical, legal, financial. Medical is obvious. What sort of medical care does the person need? What sort of medical care do they want? And that would be where a medical directive comes in. Legal is what happens to their stuff or their estate, let's say, both while they're still alive and after they've gone. That's where a will comes in. That's where a power of attorney comes in potentially. And finally, and this is where we really come in, the financial side of things. How are we going to pay for all this? Where does the money go if any is left over? What do we do about the money that exists while they're transitioning into higher tiers of medical care, right? And how do we structure that so that that money goes as far as it can possibly go without feeling like, wow, we just blew through all of their assets for this medical care. Not even that that's a bad thing. Excuse me. Not even that that's a bad thing, but I think a lot of people worry about that. What if I go into a nursing home and all of a sudden all this money that I saved is just going to pay medical bills, right? Like I didn't get to enjoy the money that I worked hard to save, or I didn't get to leave anything behind because it all went to medical bills. Now, some of you might be watching this and saying, "Yeah, that's how it works. Sometimes you got to pay medical bills, and that's what the money's for." And to an extent, I agree with that. But let's do that as smartly as possible. Okay. So, caregiver plan. This is something, again, I encourage you to really externalize this, whether it's just writing it down or typing it into a computer. Think about some what ifs ahead of time. If you're doing it for yourself, okay, who would I like to care for me? And in your head, start thinking, are they going to be willing to care for me? Right? That's a part of the equation as well. What are your wishes? What are your priorities? Hey, I'd really like, to stay in my house for as long as I possibly can. Or just keep me out of a nursing home, but if I have to go to assisted living, that's fine. Or, hey, whatever care I need, just put me there and I'll deal with it. Right? You can have your own opinion about that, but get it down somewhere. Okay. And think about, hey, the cabin up north. I inherited that from my mom and dad. Kids, we got to find a way so that you're not going to be forced to sell it someday if you have to pay for my medical care or if medical bills for my medical care start adding up and we're looking for assets to grab here. What can we do to keep that in the family? And I'm just throwing out examples here, but I think you get what I'm saying. And it allows not just you to clarify your thoughts, but it allows the caregivers to really get a clear picture of what your thoughts are. And again, how can you expect them to do what you want if you haven't clearly communicated what you want? Also, and this is a well, I was going to say underrated, but it's probably not underrated. A huge part of the equation is if you write this stuff down and you do have, let's say, multiple kids. I have two daughters, so someday they're gonna have to, take care of me probably in some fashion. Who knows what it'll be like? But anyway, I want them to know what I want clearly and not disagree about that, right? Now, butt heads over, well, dad told me one time that this is what he wanted. And then my other daughters, no, he told me something different. I mean, hopefully I'm consistent enough over time, but you get talking, you say one thing one time, they take it one way. If it's in writing, they can't argue about it. Or as we all know, they still can argue about it, but it's harder, right? So let's make it harder for them to argue about it. So let's talk about medical for a second. I often reference, and this is with regards to insurance, with regards to annuities, which technically are insurance, but not like your traditional insurance policy. You'll hear about these things called ADLs, activities of daily living. This is a technical point. So this is, probably something to know or maybe jot down if you're taking notes here. You'll hear about ADLs or activities of daily living because those are the criteria, and they're listed here, that you have to meet to trigger some sort of a benefit usually. So, for example, clearest example I can give you, if you have long-term care insurance, which I'm going to wager most of you on this call do not because it's not as common as it used to be because it's expensive, it's hard to get, and you might not use it, but some of you I know do. If you have long-term care insurance, to trigger that benefit to turn on, you usually have to be able to demonstrate that you need help with two out of these six activities of daily living. So you need help with eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, continence, and toileting meaning getting to the toilet, continence meaning actually going to the bathroom, and transferring, right? So if you can demonstrate two out of these six, and a doctor would sign off on that, right? That you need help with, that is what triggers the benefit on your insurance policy or your annuity or whatever, right? So these are very important criteria that it's helpful to know. And it's helpful to watch for these things because if you have long-term care insurance, which is the catch-all name, by the way, for that doesn't just have to be nursing home insurance. That could be assisted living. That could be in-home health care. That is a long-term care kind of catches all of those. If you have long-term care insurance, most policies, your incentive is to sort of turn the thing on as soon as you're basically able to turn it on. Depends on your policy. I won't give you that as blanket advice, but a lot of the times from the ones I've looked at, it's like, yeah, we should be watching for these six things. And if there is a point at which, hey, I think actually we could make a case that they are struggling, or I am struggling with two out of these six, then hey, let's get that thing turned on. Right. And I'll talk about long-term care insurance a little bit more. In fact, we've done a whole webinar before about long-term care insurance, which you can find on our YouTube channel. But it I won't go into super detail because I know not everybody has it and not everybody needs it, to be totally fair, okay? But I will mention it, and especially when it comes to these ADLs, activities of daily living. This is also just for regular health insurance purposes. This is going to be an important thing. So, what I would say is don't worry about memorizing these, but know that these are the criteria that insurance companies tend to use for this sort of thing. So, in-home help, that's usually the first layer of help that's considered, right? And there's all different types, obviously. You can have a nurse that just visits periodically. You could have non-medical people, but just helpers, essentially, who stop by, kind of give the house a once over, help with any little thing, and then, say their goodbyes. A full-time in-home health aide, or not, that doesn't mean 24/7. That would be the next category, live-in help, or an elder care specialist. But in-home health aide would be maybe during the days, come in, make sure medication's being taken with whatever health challenges you're dealing with, make sure that's being dealt with correctly. Again, I think we're all somewhat familiar with this, but it's just look at the spectrum here. It's from very limited touch to very high touch, I would say. And by the time you get to live in help, usually that's going to be a spouse, a child, and then a friend in that order. I mean, fewer and further between are friends living in the home. Not even my example at the beginning, were they living with this person I was talking about. So that's for a friend, that would be a pretty extraordinary friend. But of course, it can happen. we need to be reviewing insurance policies, okay? And not just your health insurance and Medicare. Obviously, you're going to see those things when you re-enroll every year or when you enroll for the first time. You'll look it over. We'll see what sort of benefits there are. But remember, for Medicare, when you're re-enrolling every year, if you've entered a new phase of healthcare, think about that. Maybe the same policy you've been on for years doesn't make as much sense anymore. Maybe there's a higher tier of policy, a lower deductible, something that has a little bit more ancillary benefits that might make sense for you. Again, it's such a individual situation. I'm throwing out generalities here, but don't just hit renew because, well, it's always worked okay for me. Think about it for a minute before you hit renew. Life insurance. So if you have life insurance, we need to know what the provisions are for if you were to become sick, ill, incapacitated one way or the other. And I don't, because most people think about life insurance, rightly so, as well, that's what kicks in if I die, right? But there are provisions in a lot of these policies where you can get at that money early if you've demonstrated a health need. Especially, I mean, the most common one is like a terminal illness or something like that, which that again is pretty, the writing's on the wall there. It's pretty clear. But we need to be rereading these. And if you need help with that, I am more than happy to help you read through it. I mean, I always tell people, look, I don't necessarily know what's in your policy if I've never looked at it before, but I read these terms and conditions a lot for a lot of different people. So I'm going to know the vocabulary that they're using and be able to interpret it for you a little better, maybe translate it for you from the legalese of the contract. So if you've got stuff like that, oh yeah, that Paul, we took that out 20 years ago and it's just been sitting there and blah blah blah. Let's bring it in, have us look at it, send it over. It might be, yeah, this is pretty boilerplate, this is pretty straightforward, that's all good. But if just in case, if there's an interesting provision in there or something, oh, okay, that's a nice one. Keep this around because that's really valuable. We can at least give you our opinion on that. So I'm going to encourage all of you to do that if you have a policy lying around like that. Same thing with long-term care. Even more so for this conversation with long-term care policies, if you have one. Um, if you have one, we need to know exactly how the benefits work. And I'll briefly, because it can get complicated, but I'm going to briefly give you a couple examples here. Policies these days have time limits on them. Okay. So from when you start it, there's a time limit for how long the benefits will pay. And I don't mean the exclusion period at the beginning. So all policies, or almost all of them, are going to have like a 60 or 90-day period from the day the policy turns on before you get the first check. Okay, so that's a common thing. You might, if you follow the news, you might have heard people complain about that before because they didn't remember that from when they booked their policy. That's a pretty standard thing. There's reasons for it. We don't need to get into it. What I'm talking about with the limit is it's a 5-year policy, meaning it's going to pay X amount of dollars per day for up to 5 years, or 3 years, or 4 years, or 7 years. Depends on what the policy about was. They give you options now. Um, we need to know that because that's going to make a big determination on when we look to turn this on. I have some people I work with who bought their policies a long time ago when they were still unlimited benefits, meaning from the day you turn it on, as long as you still demonstrate the need for it, they will never stop paying you the per day amount that they've promised. Okay. You can't get those anymore, or at least I haven't seen them for years and years. I mean, these people bought their policies in the 90s who still have that. But wow, that makes a big difference, right? Because if you have an unlimited benefit, essentially what you're looking for is what's my first opportunity to turn this thing on and start getting the checks. Not only do you start getting checks, but you stop paying the premiums. So it's a double win there. But that's, like I said, that's pretty uncommon. So especially if you have an older policy, we absolutely need to know how it works, and we can help you do that. I could go off of all. And the easiest way to do that, you can request in-force, meaning active policy illustrations on each life insurance, long-term care insurance, really any kind of insurance. to confirm what your premiums are. You probably know that already because you're the one paying it. What the death benefits are, what you could do before the death benefit with life insurance, or for long-term care, what it will pay out. We just need to inventory. That's all I'm getting at. I threw a lot of hypotheticals at you. Just inventory. That's the first thing. All right, so review your care recipients' long-term care funding options. Wow, what a mouthful. Essentially, how are we going to pay for this? Whether you're thinking about yourself or a parent or whoever, how are we going to pay for whatever care we've now decided that they needed medically, right? So obviously, the first thing, oops, I didn't mean to go forward. Um, those activities of daily living, right? Would they qualify for needing help with at least two of them? Well, that might open a few doors there. Um, these are just good questions to ask. I'm not going to read all of these, but the thing that I stress, and I just spent a couple minutes talking about long-term care insurance, right? Not everybody needs long-term care insurance. It is expensive. It is hard to get if you don't have it. A lot of people who are thinking about it just end up applying and like, oh, we got rejected anyway, so I guess we can't have it. And there are other things you can do if you're dead set on, I need something here. Maybe not if I don't qualify for long-term care, but not everybody needs a long-term care policy. For those of you on this call, which will not be everybody, but a lot of you who have pensions, right? You have a pension, you have Social Security, you probably have investments at some level. I'm speaking generally, but most of you do. Um, and so those three things combined might cover a good chunk or perhaps all of what you need to pay for your medical care. And now, certainly in some cases, it will not, right? And care costs these days run a wide range depending on what you're looking at. Memory care, for example, if you're at the highest level, and I'm sure even the highest level varies, but in my head, it's 15,000 bucks a month for memory care. Now, it's easy to think about worst case scenarios, the most expensive scenarios, I guess I should say. Obviously, only a small portion of people get in to memory care. Not get in is the wrong way. Are put in memory care at that level. Um, it's not something that I think we should assume is going to happen, certainly, but you all know your medical histories. A regular, sort of assisted living, very hands-off level of care, but still in a facility or in an apartment, a senior apartment or whatever. Again, this runs the gamut. But you're looking at, at least 3 to 4 thousand bucks a month. That's probably the low end, I would say. So somewhere in that range, right? Which is a big range, 3 to 4 thousand to 15,000, and it's only going to get more expensive every year. And that's not talking about in-home health care that is really expensive depending on if you're bringing somebody to you especially for a good length of time every day. So that can be daunting when you see those numbers. Oh my God, where are we going to come? Where are we going to find the money for this? But again, somebody like me, we can make a plan for this, and it does not have to necessarily involve insurance. There are ways to budget for this, to pay for this with assets you have if we're just making sure that we're using them most efficiently. What should your pension pay for? What should it not pay for? What should Social Security pay for? How much of your assets should we use? Should we do anything different with your assets now that we know this could potentially be a cost, right? So I'm thinking about that kind of on your behalf when we're talking one-on-one, but it's something that we can absolutely dive into more detail together too. Okay, Anthony, what should my long-term care plan be? And I'll have a bunch of questions for you, of course, but we can arrive at that answer together. So that's what I would encourage you, that last bullet point there. Weigh your options, but seek professionals. And by the way, we're going to talk about legal things like power of attorney, and that sort of stuff. We have professionals who we recommend to people who can help set that stuff up. Like I'm not an attorney, I can't. Well, power of attorney is not a good example because it's just a form to do. But like a will, I don't write wills. We can refer you to people who do though. So if you're wondering about that, so Medicare does not cover long-term care. Let me say that again. Medicare does not cover long-term care. Okay, nursing homes, assisted living in home. It's essentially think about it as though it does not cover it. There sometimes are very limited circumstances in which it will cover something. Don't count on it. It's not designed for that, essentially. We've got to think about your long-term care costs above and beyond what Medicare is going to cover. Now, Medicaid covers it, and that's part of a long-term care plan that some of us might think about, which is, well, maybe my plan is, Anthony, that I exhaust my assets, and then once I exhaust my assets, Medicaid kicks in and the state pays for it. And that is an absolutely valid strategy. Now, there are things to think about there, right? When the state kicks in and pays, they're not paying the top of the line, they're not paying for luxury accommodations here, or maybe what you would envision as what you want. So we got to think about some of those variables ahead of time to set ourselves up if Medicaid is going to be part of the strategy. And I don't want you to get, I think we think of Medicaid as, well, that's for people who are struggling, and I'm not struggling. I'm just weighing my options here. But it's totally a valid strategy, but it needs to be planned for well, is what I would say about Medicaid. So moving from some of those decision points, those variables quickly to legal, the four main things, and there's way more than four things you can do legally when it comes to this conversation, but the four things that where you start. And a lot of this is just where do you start? Power of attorney, healthcare agent and directives, will, and trust. Okay? The first three are the ones that almost all of you I would recommend that you do. Trust is an if. I don't think all of you need trust. To be totally frank, I don't think everybody needs a trust. I'll talk about trust in a second, but let me get through the first three. Power of attorney, and I think yes. Well, there is a slide that's going to throw up a few bullet points about power of attorney, but let me just talk about it here first. Power of attorney, many of you know, so I'll try to be brief, but some of you may not, is a legal document that allows someone else to act on your behalf in legal and financial matters. Okay? Not medical matters. So it's not an all-in kind of thing. It's just legal and financial. Okay? This is very important for as you either start losing capacity potentially, and then you'd want something called a durable power of attorney that stays in force even if you become completely incapacitated. But as you start losing capacity, you need someone to help you with this stuff. That's what a power of attorney, I should clarify, this stuff being financial, legal things. Hey, I need somebody else to be managing my money for me, not just an advisor like me, but someone who's actually like paying my bills for me. That's what a power of attorney can do. And once they're empowered, they're you as far as like I or any other financial institution is concerned. They call up and say, hey, I'm so and so. I'm the power of attorney for so and so. Okay, great. I can tell you everything I would have told them one to one, and you can give instructions and all that. So it goes without saying, pick somebody good for this, right? Don't just throw this to the oldest kid just because. I hope none of you would just do that just because. But think about who's going to be responsible about this because there's a lot of power there. And you want them obviously to use it as little as they possibly need to because hopefully you're able to do it, but get it in place ahead of time. Okay. In Minnesota, there is a statutory form. It's a short form power of attorney. Just Google power of attorney Minnesota. It'll probably be your first result. It's a PDF. You can print it. You can fill it out yourself. If you need help filling it out, I can kind of give you a few pointers on it. But again, I might refer you to an attorney if you really want to get detailed about it because that's not my world per se. But personally, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Your signature gets notarized. The person who you're empowering or people, you can have more than one power of attorney. Those people then also have to sign, but they do not have to have their signatures notarized. What some people do, and there's actually a special power of attorney that accomplishes this called springing power of attorney that springs into action only when you need it. But what some people do is they pre-fill out the form, get it signed, get it notarized, and then tell the kids or whoever, hey, in the break in case of emergency drawer, there's this form. If you sign it, it becomes active. And you're off to the races and you're now my power of attorney. So they don't even have them put it in, but they get everything ready, is what I'm getting at. You can do it however you want to do it. I am power of attorney for my wife. She's power of attorney for me right now. So, and we felt like that was a smart decision because, again, you want to do this stuff before the problems arise. You don't want to have to be scrambling when something has happened and then get all this stuff done. It's just going to make it way more complicated. Healthcare agent and healthcare directive. Okay. Again, I think there'll be a slide in 1 or 2 pages that talks about this a little bit more detail. But essentially, this is you picking who's going to make medical decisions for you. That's the agent. Or the directive, you're writing out yourself what you want to happen medically. Obviously, this is especially important if you have a specific health situation that you really want specific things done. If you're like me and I have a healthcare directive now, um, where it's just sort of general, like, look, nothing crazy go happens here, but do everything you can, blah blah blah, pretty boilerplate stuff. Then it's more of just a fail safe at the end of the day. Like, I don't have anything super weird or fancy in mind. But you know your healthcare situation the best, so you should be able to put in your words what you want to happen. That's the healthcare directive, right? Um, and that is binding, even on the agent. So the agent who you could empower to make decisions that maybe are not specifically outlined in the directive, they still have to go by that directive too. So it's not like they can overrule it per se. A will, most of us are familiar with the concept. A will is going to govern what happens to all of your property, and don't forget minor children or children under your care. So that's a piece of it for me, for example, because I have 2 kids who are um, under the age of 5 right now. So, who's going to be their guardian is in my will. And their backup to that guardian. That's something people overlook. Don't just pick, who's your executor of your will, the person who executes it. Pick a backup to them too, just in case. Just in case the first one either, they're not around, they don't want to do it, again, I'm being very planful with all this, but a will is going to govern primarily what happens with your property when you're no longer here. Okay. And that would involve the probate process. And probate, I say this all the time, gets a bad rap. I think we all hear the horror stories of it. A well-written will that's pretty clear about this stuff, generally, at least in Minnesota, from what I'm told, is not a big deal. That's probably not the right way to phrase it. Not that it's not a big deal. It doesn't amount to the horror stories that you hear about. Those are one-off kind of. There's usually something weird going on, like we don't know where the will is, or there are multiple versions of a will. That's usually what causes like those really complicated, really salacious cases from my understanding. Again, I'm not a probate attorney, but don't be scared of probate is kind of my message around it. And did you know all of your accounts, your investment accounts, your bank accounts, even your house, we can set up so that they have beneficiaries on them. There's multiple different ways to do that. Bank accounts, it's called payable on death. House, it's called transfer on death deed. The bank accounts one, you just go to the bank and you can set it up. The house, you got to go to the county office where you live and say, I want to change my deed into a transfer on death deed. And then accounts you have with us, for example, if we have beneficiaries on them, and all IRAs or deferred comp have beneficiaries, all that goes according to your beneficiary, not according to the will. So it just skips right over probate. You don't even need to worry about having a will for those assets to go exactly where you want them to go. So put beneficiaries on everything that you can. And your accounts with us, we help you take care of that. But people overlook the bank accounts and the deed or the house, for example. So to say that again, oops, didn't mean to go forward again. To say that again, transfer on death deed for the house, and that's you have to go to the county office and you can get your deed kind of just changed into that, and payable on death for bank accounts. Those are things that are overlooked, and that allows those assets to just avoid probate altogether. So then you don't even have to think about probate for at least those. And again, as I say, anything that comes up, if you key in, ooh, that might apply to me, Anthony. Jot it down. Certainly, you can chime in and ask a question here. Oh, and I see there was a question. My apologies for not getting to that right away. I didn't have my dashboard open. Um, all right, so I'm going to answer this question really quick. Question was, mother's savings will be exhausted shortly after she reaches 101 in this August. Wow, congratulations. Due to cost of nursing home. Should she be applying for Medicaid already? Um, that what I will say is talk to the nursing home themselves. I believe so, but I'm not a Medicaid expert, so I don't want to talk. I don't want to just give you an answer of what I think. I want to know the answer. So, number one, I'll look into that and see if I can find the answer, and we'll send the answer out in the recap. But I would talk to the nursing home. They're going to have a coordinator. At least I think they would. You didn't say what the nursing home is, and even if you did, I wouldn't necessarily know the specific home. But my guess is they're going to have a coordinator there who's going to be able to help navigate that. That would be my first place I would look. I'd say, look, here's the situation. Here's where the money is coming from. Here's what our financial situation looks like. What do we do next, as far as you're concerned? Because they're going to help you figure out the best solution. It's in their interest too. So that's what I would do. I will look for the answer on whether she should be applying for Medicaid already. My gut instinct would say yes, but I'll try to follow up on that in the recap here. Good. Okay. Lastly, trusts. Now, trusts, literally, we could do an entire hour on trusts. You'd all be asleep because that's how boring they can be. But they can also be really useful. Um, oh, and then another quick question came in. Repeat about bank account going to payable. So for bank accounts, so I'm answering a question real quick. For bank accounts, you can do what's called payable on death, POD. And you just go to the bank and say, I would like to turn my bank accounts into POD, which is exactly what it sounds like. When you're no longer here, the bank will have a beneficiary on file if you turn them into payable on death. So that's the term you need to know. You could walk into a bank and say, I want to add beneficiaries to my bank account. Or even, you don't even need to know that word. You could probably walk in and say, hey, when I died, I want to set up who my bank account goes to. They should be able to guide you there, but the technical term is POD or payable on death. That's what you can set up for your bank accounts. Good question. And yeah, that's something that, again, people don't think about that all the time. And I try to remind everybody. Okay. Trusts briefly, because again, this could be the rest of our time just on trust. Trusts equate with control. Okay. Having a trust allows you to control the assets that get put in the trust even after you are gone. Okay. Very important if you have a family situation or just whoever's going to inherit the money that you might leave behind that is sticky or tricky, or you've got siblings that you want to treat unequally for one reason or another. Maybe one of them's really poor with money, one of them is totally responsible. That's totally valid. And you don't want to make them butt heads with each other. You want to set it in stone what's going to happen with the money. And really, the sky's the limit with this. You can simply use it as a way to distribute money over a long period of time. You can say, I want to earmark this money for only education, shelter. It's not fun money, it's advancement money, whatever. Literally, the sky's the limit. I really recommend trusts in cases, again, where siblings potentially are going to be treated unevenly. Maybe it's not an issue that the sibling has. Maybe it's a medical problem. Maybe they have an illness or a condition that requires money to be passed to them through a trust. That would be called like a special needs trust. That's very important. So that's kind of the primary angle through which you're going to interact with trust. There are other angles too. There are trusts where, and this is where I'll give my disclaimer about people who think they can outsmart the system. We've all heard, maybe we all haven't, I've heard it many times from people in my office saying, hey, my neighbor's uncle's cousin went into a nursing home, but went on Medicaid right away because they put all their assets in like a trust and the government couldn't get at them for their medical bills. Can I do that too? So let me break down what that actually is when you hear that. Because it always comes from a friend's relative's uncle, right? Or something like that. I heard about this super smart thing, but it's a mystery to me. The way that works is you can put property, including investment assets, into an irrevocable trust. Okay. And there are two types of trust, revocable and irrevocable. Irrevocable, as it sounds, once it's in there, it is what it is. Now, technically, there's ways you can try to mess with an irrevocable, but it's very hard. You have to go to a judge to change it. So once it's there, it's there. And essentially, a lot of the assets you would put in an irrevocable trust, they're not your assets anymore. They're the trust assets. And there's all sorts of different rules about, so it's not like you can just put, an investment account in there and then still use the money just like you could when it was your name. You've given up something. What you've gained by doing that, potentially, and I'll explain that caveat in a second, is it's no longer your asset, it's the trust asset. So when creditors or people, you're looking to see whether you qualify for Medicaid or not, look at your assets, they don't count anymore. The big caveat to this, and this is why people, you hear that story and you're like, oh, that sounds like such a good idea. And then in practice, it's not as good as it sounds. There is a 5-year look back on anything you would put even into an irrevocable trust. So, in other words, if within 5 years you were to need medical care or something that would start draining your assets, they can look back. They, being the government, can look back and see what you had for assets 5 years ago and decide whether that should count towards what you're now still required to pay. So if you're going to engage in something like that, and I usually don't recommend this, I think it creates more problem than it works. There are some clear-cut cases where it is smart, but it's rarer that it's the smart answer than it sounds like from these stories you hear. I usually don't recommend it. But no, there are strings attached here. It's not as simple as, well, I can just put everything in this other account. I can still use it, and then they can't charge me, they can't make me liquidate it to pay for my care. In theory, that's how it works. In practice, it's a lot more complicated. So just know that up front. Um, the first two things you should do, even probably before a will, to be totally honest, is a power of attorney healthcare directive. A lot fewer people even have those than wills. That's one reason why I would call them a priority. But I agree with that sentiment. Healthcare agent, create a healthcare directive. I already talked about this. Healthcare agent should be someone who knows you and knows what you want. Okay. And beyond knowing what you want, has your best interest at heart. Hopefully that's obvious, but again, just have that in the back of your head as you're thinking about that person. Um, Designate your power of attorney. I talked about this briefly, but let me again reiterate. Durable power of attorney is an agent can be authorized to act immediately on creation of the power of attorney, but durable also lasts through an event that would incapacitate you. So if I'm durable power of attorney for my wife, if she were to go into a coma, I'm still power of attorney. If I'm just regular power of attorney, if she goes into a coma, I'm no longer power of attorney. Most people and most attorneys that you work with are going to set you up with durable because that's kind of the whole point, right? Or at least you got to be ready for those worst case scenarios. Springing power of attorney is springing, meaning it springs into action, is only when specific criteria are met does it become active. And you can kind of set what some of those criteria are. So maybe you only want them to be power of attorney when you go, if you were to go into a coma. That's what a springing would be for. Um, Medicaid Asset Protection Plan. This is what I just talked about with doing a trust. How do you protect assets for the other spouse, for the heirs? By the way, there are some built-in protections. Like a lot of people worry, okay, if me and my spouse, if my spouse needs care, are we at risk of draining all of our assets to pay for my spouse's care? And then I live another 10, 20 years, and now I have no money to live on. There are even exemptions just built into the law where the state will not force a spouse to drain all of their assets. It will force them to drain a good amount of them, though. So we need to think about, and that goes into the conversation you have with me. How do we use this money most effectively? One of the things that I've talked with people about before, in terms of long-term care policies, is especially if there's an age gap in a couple, and especially if the man is the older of the two. Men tend to live shorter lives than women, and especially if they're older already. Maybe the real risk isn't that you both need care. Maybe it's that the older, the one who's more likely to die first, frankly, is the one who needs the policy. Because the real risk is what if assets are depleted caring for the older of the two and then the younger, again, lives a good long life. Complex process rules differ by state. If you're going to retire somewhere that's not Minnesota or you already live not in Minnesota, then we need to be looking at state specific rules. A lot of what I'm saying is true about Minnesota, but may or may not be true about other states because it's Medicaid is a state level program. So it can get complicated quickly, and we need to have a one-on-one about it, is essentially the answer here. Um, so, does the care recipient have a will and estate plan? Do any of those documents that I just mentioned, maybe they have them, but they need to be updated, right? And I'm not somebody who says, well, we need to redo your will every year. Certainly not. I think probably every 5 years is not bad, especially as potential laws change. Because maybe your situation hasn't changed, but the laws around you have or been tweaked a little bit. And absolutely, if a major life event happens, like um, who you want to be your beneficiaries changes, um, something that's in your will materially changes, let's get it updated. Don't leave it as this out of date thing because that's just going to create more problems for the future. Um, so, financial. This is going to be obvious to an extent, but it can get complicated quickly. Where's the income coming from? For a lot of you, pension and Social Security. What are the expenses? What's the care cost? What are your other life expenses? If you're assisted living, well, you've got your rent essentially, and that pays for part of your care and maybe a couple meals, but you're also living a semi-independent life too. So there's other expenses that go with that. What do you have for assets? What do you have for bills and liabilities? And who do you work with? And again, that's you're on this call, so you work with us, but we can help you sift through all of that. Review your beneficiaries. I do this with you a lot when you come in and do meetings where I'm like, I know nothing's probably changed, but I just want to go back through this. Make sure you're still comfortable with who your beneficiaries are. Okay. Review that. You can change your beneficiaries at any point. You can change them once and then you can call me the next day and change them again. Hopefully, they're not changing that fast, like you're writing the kids in and out of the will on a daily basis, but you could if you wanted to. And if you have a trust, and or either we recommend one or you happen to have one already, we might need to retitle your accounts into the trust name. Again, that's something I can help you with. I always tell you, look, I'm happy to explain how this works, the nuts and bolts, but realistically, I can just tell you what you need to do too. And either way is totally fine with me, but what you're comfortable with. And review this occasionally. If you have that old life insurance policy, maybe, by chance, did you take it out when you were 25 and not yet married, and maybe your parents are still the beneficiaries of it? Oops, maybe you want your spouse now to be the beneficiary. That's less common. Most people think of that, but review this stuff. It's very important. And again, we can help you with it. Identify who your professionals are. If you need recommendations, accountant, insurance, attorney, obviously we'd recommend Stein Financial Group for a financial professional. We don't necessarily recommend banks. Usually people come kind of preloaded with the banks, but we could. Certainly, we have good relationships with banks around the area as well, and not just in Minnesota, by the way. We can also potentially refer you to people who do work in a different state as well, or we can talk to the people we know in state and see who they would recommend out of state. So, we're happy to help with that too. And I won't just flash all the names of the people on the screen, but if you're looking for that, let me know, and I will be happy to get you names of people that we really do trust and think do a great job. Um, and lastly, the personal piece. What living options do you or the person you're caring for want? Again, I mentioned this at the very beginning. Are you dead set on staying in your house for as long as humanly possible? Well, that's a good thing for somebody to know who's going to take care of you, right? Let's try to make that happen. Is your plan to move into a family member's place? Do they know that? Right? That might be your plan. Oh, yeah, my oldest daughter. I'll move in with her. I could tell my 2-year-old right now, oh, yeah, I'll move in with you someday. Is she okay with that? Or is she just going to say, nah, you're going to a home. See you later. Right? Communicate the plan, right? I hope, again, some of this is obvious, but I like saying it anyway, I guess. Um, Are you eligible for any public benefits? If you're curious, and look, if you don't have a medical condition, if there's no hardships happening financially, are you probably eligible? Probably not. But if you want to look, AARP has a resource, and you can Google AARP public benefit resources, and they've got a screening tool that you can go through and look. So just Google AARP. I'll wonder if I have the actual. If I'll find the actual website address and we'll put it into the um, follow up from this, the recap when we send out the recorded video. So I'll look for that, or maybe Aaron, you can make a note and look for that. I'm sure it's in our notes here somewhere, but they have a screening tool. I haven't used it personally, so I don't know how good it is, I guess, but we were informed of that, so I thought, oh, that's good to share. A letter of this is something that I don't think a lot of people do. A letter of instruction, okay? A letter of instruction is not a legally binding document. You're not writing out your will. It doesn't get, I mean, you could file it with your will, but it's not a legal document. It's a letter, essentially, to your family, to your friends, whatever. And you could, obviously, it's a letter. You could write whatever you want. But what do you want to pass down? What do you want to make sure happens? You know, you've written it maybe in legalese in a will, but just in plain English prose, hey, these are the charities that are really important to me. If you could find a way to use what I'm leaving behind to benefit them, that would make me really happy. These are the items in the house that I've promised to random people, right? Yes, I did promise your sister that she could have that old jacket of mine. So let her have it. And you can also do that in your will, of course, but a letter might be, I don't know, just easier for them to deal with. Usernames, passwords, so overlooked. Arrangement wishes. And if you need, a little plug here, if you need help being able to write all this down, we have a booklet called the What If Workbook, which is way more detailed than any of you probably need any individual, but it covers all the different scenarios where we have templates that help you write all this stuff down. Aaron just put the PDF in the chat. You can just download it. You can find it. I believe you can even download it right from our website, or you can just email us if the link to download it in the chat doesn't work, because occasionally we run into somebody who it doesn't work for. But it's a great template for doing exactly this. And it's so often overlooked, and it often makes such a big difference for the next generation as they go through. And you don't have to wait to die for somebody to read it. You could even share that with them ahead of time, and it might be able to help. So it's a great resource. It's free. You don't send it back to us. You don't, it's not like you file it with us. You keep it, and then you tell somebody where to find it, right? And then they go through and they have all your information. So incredibly underlooked. Secure. When you have all these things, where do you put them? And think about the security you've got in place, right? If you're storing them digitally, which is common, and I have our wills and trusts. Well, actually, we don't have a trust; we just have a will. But will, power of attorney, healthcare directive, I have that on the computer. Somebody needs to know the password to your computer, though, right? If they can't get into the computer, it's as good as if they're buried under the ground. Nobody's going to find them. So, safe deposit box. Does somebody have the key? If not, we have a problem, right? Maybe the best place to put this stuff is in a secure place at home, not even necessarily a safe, but a secure place that's out of the way that nobody would look. And you tell the person who needs to know, hey, on the bookshelf under this book is a manila folder. You don't need to worry about it until something happens, right? But you know where that folder is, right? Yes, I do. Great. That's all you need to know. That is often the better way to do it because then, again, they don't have to remember your password. Or you give them the password once, but some update happens and Apple or Microsoft forces you to change your password and you forget to tell them the new one. There's tons of stories about stuff like that happening. Try to make it easy for people to find this stuff. Again, planning for the worst, hoping for the best here. There was a question that just came in, and we're just about done. A couple minutes left. The question was, if I don't have life insurance and should you get insurance for paying funeral costs upon death? Oh, like they're getting mail. This person is getting mail offers for like basically burial insurance. A lot of people like that. They like knowing that hey, that's covered. We're good. my burial, my funeral, all that stuff is covered. I'm totally fine with that. I think for a lot of people, you're gonna have the assets to do that on your own, just through what's being inherited, so it's not necessarily needed per se. But if it helps you kind of compartmentalize and okay, that's taken care of, I can move on to the next thing, then I think it's totally valuable. So I don't necessarily always see it as like a huge value, but I don't think it's a bad thing either. I'm kind of neutral toward it. It's really what you prefer to do, is I guess the shortest way for me to put it. So I think that answers the question about burial or final expenses insurance. Totally, if you're into it. If not, you're probably going to be just fine either way. What about the stress and strain it puts on the rest of the family, especially me? Obviously, many of you know caregiving impacts the caregiver as well, right? 75% of all caregivers are female, average age of 46. That's just the stats. I'm not drawing any conclusions from that, but I've got two daughters now. Again, the oldest is two, so we've got a ways before she's caregiving. But odds are, just statistically speaking, the oldest daughter is going to be the one to step in. Now, you may say, well, that's not how it worked in my family. Totally. This is just average. But be prepared if that's you, or be prepared if you're looking at, well, who's going to take care of me? That's just the way it tends to work out in our society. It's a cultural thing. That's just the way it works. Um, Make sure if you're going to be the caregiver that you're thinking about yourself as well. You need to take vacations. You need to get help. What if you're going to lose money because you have to take off work so much? How does that affect your future? That's a huge piece of the puzzle. And a lot of times you only realize that after you're already in caregiving mode and it's kind of too late to do anything about it. We can think about that ahead of time. Um, Depression and anxiety are huge problems for caregivers. Seek the help that you need or encourage the caregivers of you to seek that help as well. So I think, oh, again, and I'm short on time, so I'll go quickly through this, but pay attention to the caregivers, whether that's you or your someone's caregiving for you. And there is support for this, and they can even help you get organized to hire the right people, to run your schedule, to bring you to the doctor, all that stuff, incredibly important. There are some great technological places that can assist with this. Obviously, like Life Alert, for example, for falls or things like that, hey, a tech piece of technology is watching out for you, even if the caregiver's not there. There are medication reminder softwares. Obviously, the classic is the Monday through Sunday pill bottle or pill case, but there are digital versions of that now. You can do video check-ins if being there in person all the time is just not going to work for your life as the caregiver. Remember that that stuff's there to help you. And if at all possible, and there are things like the Family Leave Act that allow you to take leave to care for a family member, but don't rob your own financial future to sell out and care for this individual. Let's find a way that it can work for you. I'm not saying don't care for them. I'm just saying let's find a way to balance that with your life as well. And I know that's incredibly difficult and everybody's situation is totally different, but I think it's so important that you do that. So this is what we've covered. I hit a lot of information. I will be around to, these are just some reactions to it. We can skip all that for right now. The key thing here is let's get started with eating this elephant one bite at a time, making this plan, getting the documents in place, figuring out what the care receiver's wishes are. All that stuff, you can do that one step at a time, but start now. Even if you think I'm too young for this, start now. And if you need recommendations of professionals, we can help with that too. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day and be well.